Imagine waking up in ancient Egypt with a dry throat, burning under a merciless desert sun. You are desperately thirsty. You look around. No faucet. No bottled water. No refrigerator. No water filter. No laboratory testing the liquid before you drink it. There is only the Nile, a gigantic river cutting through one of the driest landscapes on Earth. And here is the terrifying part. The Nile is not clean. Its water can be brown with sediment. Animals enter it. People wash beside it. Boats travel through it. Waste can reach it. And freshwater parasites can live in the environment around it. Yet somehow, for thousands of years, Egyptians drank, farmed, traveled, built cities, raised families, and created one of the greatest civilizations in human history. So how? Did ancient Egyptians have stronger stomachs? Did they somehow become immune to dirty water? Or is there a completely different explanation, because the truth is much more fascinating? Ancient Egyptians did not have perfectly clean water. They had something else. They had knowledge, and they understood one simple fact that modern people rarely think about anymore. Water is only useful if you can actually reach it, transport it, store it, and keep it usable. Today, water feels almost free. You turn a handle, water appears, you fill a glass, you drink, you flush a toilet with drinking quality water without even thinking about it. To an ancient Egyptian, that would have looked like magic, because water was not an invisible service. Water was labor. Someone had to collect it, someone had to carry it, someone had to store it, and someone had to make sure there was enough for tomorrow. This becomes especially important when you look at Egypt itself. Ancient Egypt was a narrow strip of fertile land surrounded by enormous areas of desert. The Nile made this possible. Carl W. Butzer, one of the most important scholars of ancient Egyptian environmental history, argued that Egyptian civilization cannot be separated from the behavior of the Nile. The river flooded. The flood spread across the land. Then the water receded, leaving behind fertile soil. That cycle allowed agriculture to flourish. But the Nile was not simply an unlimited supply of drinking water. The river could change. Floods could be high or low. Some communities were close to the river, others were separated from it by desert. And during dry periods, access became much more difficult. So the Egyptians developed ways of bringing water to where people actually lived. One of the best examples comes from Deir el-Medina, the ancient workers' village near Thebes. This was home to the craftsmen who built and decorated royal tombs. And archaeological research by Egyptologist Delphine Driot reveals something surprisingly ordinary. The community had people responsible for bringing water. Water carriers would travel toward the floodplain, collect water, and transport it back to the settlement. In some cases, donkeys helped carry the heavy containers. Think about how different this is from our world. We have pipes. They had people. We have pumps. They had animals and human muscle. We have reservoirs connected to cities. They had storage vessels and organized distribution. It sounds primitive, but it was actually a functioning water system. The technology was not always a machine. Sometimes the technology was organization. A person carrying a jar is infrastructure. A donkey carrying water is infrastructure. A communal storage container is infrastructure. A rule about where to collect water is infrastructure. And that last one was especially important, because ancient Egyptians didn't understand bacteria, they didn't know about viruses, they couldn't see parasites, they had no microscope. But they could observe consequences. If one water source repeatedly caused problems, people could learn to avoid it. If another source remained reliable, people could return to it. If water was muddy, they could let it settle. If one area became dry, they could search somewhere else. This is how practical knowledge can develop without modern science. You don't need to know what a pathogen is to discover that one particular pool makes people sick. You only need to notice the pattern. And ancient people were surrounded by patterns. They watched the river. They watched animals. They watched plants. They watched the seasons. They remembered where water remained after the flood. They knew which areas became dry first. And that knowledge could mean the difference between comfort and disaster. But there was another problem. The Nile was not only the source of life, it was also part of the disease environment. Modern research has uncovered evidence of parasitic infections in ancient Egyptian remains. One of the most important is schistosomiasis. This disease is caused by parasitic worms whose life cycle involves freshwater environments. Researchers have found evidence of schistosome infection in ancient Egyptian remains, and molecular research has even detected evidence associated with schistosoma parasites in Egyptian mummies thousands of years old. So the popular idea that ancient Egyptians simply drank dirty water because they had stronger immune systems doesn't survive serious examination. They got sick. They suffered from parasites. They suffered from infections. And children were particularly vulnerable to dehydration and disease. The Nile could feed you. The Nile could transport you. The Nile could make your farmland fertile. And the Nile could expose you to organisms that wanted to live inside you. That is the paradox. The same environment that created Egyptian civilization also created health risks. So why didn't the Egyptians simply avoid the river? Because they couldn't. The river was too important. Instead, they learned to manage the risk. They used different sources, they transported water, they stored it, they allowed sediment to settle, they could seek groundwater through wells, they built channels and storage systems, and they developed social rules around water. None of these methods created modern sterile drinking water, but that wasn't necessary. The goal was not perfection, the goal was survival. And there is another fascinating part of the story. Ancient Egyptians didn't rely entirely on plain water for their daily liquid and nutrition. Beer was a major part of Egyptian life. The Metropolitan Museum of Art describes bread and beer as staples of the Egyptian diet. But ancient Egyptian beer wasn't simply modern beer poured into an ancient cup. It was thicker, cloudy, nutritious, and produced as part of the food system. It supplied calories as well as liquid. This has sometimes produced the popular claim that ancient Egyptians drank beer because their water was unsafe. That explanation is too simple. Beer itself required water, it required grain, it required labor, it required production. So beer didn't eliminate the water problem. It was another way Egyptian society used the resources available to it. And that brings us to something even bigger. The Egyptians didn't just survive because the Nile existed, they survived because they organized civilization around the Nile. Think about agriculture. You need water to grow food. Food supports people. People maintain settlements. Settlements need water. Water therefore becomes connected to food, population, labor, taxation, and political power. The person who controls water does not merely control a drink. They influence the survival of the community. This is why water could become incredibly valuable even in a country dominated by one enormous river.